0 to 60 can define a performance car, but it's the fastest 60 to 0 that's the aim of Tarok's brakes. From road cars to race cars, circuits, special stages, or the autostrada, nothing reduces speed like Tarok's brakes. Italy gave the world the art of Da Vinci and Michelangelo. Tarok's has given drivers the art of stopping. For more information and to acquire your own masterpiece, visit tarox.co.uk. Yes, it's me, Mike Stone, and this is the Backseat Driver Podcast. It's the fastest, it's the friendliest, and it's for all the family. The Gas Shocks 116 Trophy and 120 Coupe Cup are the fastest growing race series in the UK, taking in 6 one-hour races and 8 sprints at all the top circuits. Visit 116trophy.com to find out more and get yourself behind the wheel. I'd like to introduce to the Backseat Driver radio show, Gregor Marshall. Now, Gregor, I suppose you could say, has 2 claims to fame. He is an accomplished racing driver. He has just written a book, but he is the son of the late, great Jerry Marshall, one of motor racing's, shall we say, most ebullient characters. Gregor, welcome to the Backseat Driver radio show.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm not sure about accomplished, but I am trying.
Well, I suppose when Dad was Jerry Marshall, it's one of those things, it must be not terrible, but it must be difficult to try and achieve the standards that your dad achieved, because it's like I said, he was one of the racing's great characters. He won numerous awards, he won some serious races, he drove the famous Big Bertha, the Vauxhall Firenza. So, I mean, what was it like growing up with a dad like Jerry Marshall?
Yeah, I mean, growing up with Dad wasn't always the easiest, because he was a character, behind the wheel at the racetrack, and also at home he could be a character as well. Always getting up to mischief of some sort. I growing up, I always wanted to be like Dad, but I never wanted to copy what he did, kind of thing. He had such an array of motor racing, races, wins, cars, etc. And so you can't copy someone like that. But if I could achieve a percentage of what he had achieved, then for me that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Dad always saw it slightly differently. He'd say to me, well, you won't be as good as me, so why bother being a racing driver? And I'd say, well, because it's what I want to do and I enjoy it. And if I'm not as good as you, I'll still be as good as most people. Yeah. And I think he saw it slightly differently, that I should be a little bit more sort of not aggressive about it, but want to beat him. But I knew that would never happen, and maybe to a degree that is the difference between people that are professional, successful sports people and people that aren't at the top of the game.
Yeah. I mean, people now talk about, like, Hamilton and Schumacher. I mean, Schumacher, to my mind, was ruthless, but Michael Schumacher, to me, and Senna were 2 of the greatest that there's ever been. They talk about all they've achieved. They're going to win their 100th race. I mean, your dad won 625 overall and class wins, along with numerous championships. I mean, that is a serious quantity of wins, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, Dad did just over 1,400 races, so it's a pretty good strike rate. Almost 1 in 2 that he won, and that was over a 40-year period. Yeah. So you're looking at sort of 15 odd wins a year, and that's against a high-class opposition. It's not just little club events every weekend. Some of those are international events, national championships, and as you say, he won numerous championships. I think Dad won 31 championships, which is pretty good going, really.
I mean, that is I mean, it puts into context the modern racing drivers, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, motor racing has changed. Changed during Dad's lifetime. You know, when Dad first started out, especially back in the minis in, you know, sort of 63, 64.
Yeah.
You know, they literally, you know, they'd build an engine at home in the kitchen, hire a mini from one of the rental companies, put the engine in it, race it over the weekend, and then, you know, change the engine Monday morning, take the car back to the rental company. No one was any the wiser, unless there was any damage, but that obviously would have to be explained away. Because you didn't have, you know, you didn't necessarily have to wear seatbelts. You didn't have the overalls. You know, you had a helmet. You didn't have roll cages. You didn't have fire extinguishers. You know, those were all things that started to come in during the 70s.
Yeah.
And then, that added cost to things. But by that stage, you know, Dad had become successful, you know, from a racing perspective and also from a business perspective, and that, you know, he could, you know, afford them. Whereas when he first started out, he wouldn't have been able to afford them, but you didn't need them, so it didn't really matter too much. And you know, if you look at motor racing today, you know, the biggest barrier to entry for anyone to go motor racing, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, what background you're from, it is cost.
Yeah.
You know, and it tends to be cost of the safety equipment and the equipment that goes in a race car. You know, it's very, very expensive and does make it prohibitive.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's well known in the rallying world that back in the 60s, people would hire a car, go and rally it, clean it off and give it back to the hire company on a Monday morning, having possibly achieved a significant win in a major championship. But the car was stuck back there, or else they would, like you said, they would borrow them out of showrooms, excuse me, race them, stick a different engine in, race them, do what they were doing, and then Monday morning it was all back to normal, all polished up and back up for sale again.
Yeah, and it was always one of Dad's sort of strap lines for his car business. You know, never raced or rallied.
Yeah.
You know, to show that the car was in good condition. But I'm sure a few of those might have been raced and rallied. He just didn't want to admit to it.
Has this mini always had all these ripples on the floor pan? Can I ask? Now, I mean, that's the one thing. He was a car dealer as well, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah. So Dad worked with a guy called Martin Lilly, who most people might know as owning TVR in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. And Martin and his family were, you know, reasonably wealthy. And Martin had a collection of race cars, and then decided to set up a business called the Barnet Motor Company. And Dad and Martin were good friends, so Dad worked there as sales director and also as sales director at TVR. Then, for whatever reason, which some of the stories have probably been embellished over time, Dad and Martin went their separate ways, which I think was down to Dad writing off too many TVRs on the road. But luckily, it worked out for Dad. You know, he started selling racing bits.
Yeah.
But then, after a month or two, he got picked up by Bill Blinstein to be the official sort of works Vauxhall driver in '67. And that was then his career from a racing perspective and also from a personal perspective sort of covered. And then he just did a bit of trading himself from home until about 71 when he became very good friends with a guy called John Wingfield.
Yeah.
And they then set up a business together in 72 called Marshall Wingfield. And, you know, they traded in, you know, race cars and, you know, high-end and exotic cars. You know, and Dad was still trading literally up until the day he passed away. Yeah. Unfortunately, after he passed away, one of the guys that bought a car from him needed the spare keys, which Dad hadn't been able to find, which I was able to find for him. Dad, you know, he did do, motor racing was his main career, I'd say, through the 70s and 80s. But then, you know, his secondary career with being a car trader or dealer, that was always his sort of backup.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is you mentioned Bill Blinstein, etc. I mean, your dad was known for his very ebullient style, but he's best known, I think, for driving cars like Big Bertha, which was the V8 Holden Repco Vauxhall Ventura, and various other cars. There was Baby Bertha. I mean, though he wasn't exclusive to Vauxhall, that is where he made... That I would say is not where he made his name, but that's where I would say he came to the fore driving Vauxhalls.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think people forget that Dad started off in minis, and minis were really his thing, which is quite strange when you sort of look at him back then. 6 foot, and
he was a big guy, was your dad, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he was 6 foot then, and he would have been around 17 stone, which wasn't really the best thing for a mini. But he raced minis and was picked up or went into partnership with a guy called Brian Claydon of New Tune.
Yeah.
And they raced in British touring cars and had some very good results. Beating the works Broadspeed minis, and that really helped get the attention of Bill Blindstein, because Bill had been he worked for Cooper. And actually, Bill had the first ever international race win in a Mini Cooper at Spa. So when Bill started racing Vauxhalls in the sort of 64, 65, it wasn't a works team, it was just Bill trying to get Vauxhall involved. And end of 66, 67, Vauxhall said, right, we'll be involved unofficially. Yeah. And they wanted a works driver. And Bill knew that, it was too much of his time on the engineering side, so he wanted a driver. And he remembered Dad from the mini days and got Dad involved. Yeah. And it was quite, from 67, it was tough. The Viva then was a 1256. It was racing against the 1293 Coopers, which were obviously well developed, well sponsored race cars, and they were quicker. Yeah. It wasn't until 69 when the 2 litre Viva GT engine came, or the 2 litre engine came out, and the Viva GT was released. That's when they could actually start going for sort of overall wins, and then with the introduction of sort of special saloons. So they had some real success. And I think that the other thing that worked out really well for them, especially in the very early 70s, was television. You'd always have someone like Grandstand showing live racing from Brands Hatch, from Hill. And it was Ford had the old adage of sort of win on Sunday, sell on Monday, and Vauxhall saw that and wanted a bit of that business themselves. So it worked very well through the early 70s, and then when the Firenzas came out, and by that time Vauxhall got involved with dealer team Vauxhall, so the cars were better, quicker cars, more well developed, more professional, and had a lot of success, which was fantastic for Dad, fantastic for Bill and DTV, and also for Vauxhall. In the 70s, DTV really put Vauxhall on the map.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I grew up in that era as such. I was in my early teens in the 70s. Vauxhall were not a brand that you would immediately associate with motor racing. I mean, everybody knew about the Fords and everything else. But if you looked at the road cars, there were the quick Escorts and things like that. And it was only when Vauxhall, shall we say, took the humble Viva and then turned it into the Magnum with a 2.3 engine in it, and the Firenza, the droop snoot, of course, I suppose you could say to a degree was the competitor to the RS2000s. Vauxhall, to a degree, in the 70s, were playing catch-up with the established, or the other established brands who already had a motor racing pedigree about them.
Yeah, no, definitely. Vauxhall saw the success of Ford, and they really wanted to sort of copy that. As you say, the Viva GT started the sort of more sporty side of the Vauxhalls, and then
because just putting in, there was also, if memory serves, besides the Viva GT, there was the Brabham version of it.
Yes, so the Brabham version was quite rare, and it was a link up that Vauxhall had with Jack Brabham. And it was quite funny at the time. I always remember Dad saying to me there was a real sort of competitive edge between Brabham and DTV, or at the time it would have been Blindstein Engineering before, because DTV wasn't formed until 72. Yeah. It was always like a them and us scenario. And to be fair, the Blindstein cars were actually quicker than the Brabham cars.
Oh, right.
And they did compete against each other a few times. But it was really when Vauxhall homologated the 2.3 engine in 72. Yeah. But that's when Vauxhall started becoming more sporty and quicker. And then the droop snoot was announced in 73. It didn't actually come out till 74. But at that stage, we then had the Suez fuel crisis. And, and that, unfortunately, that killed off the droop snoot Firenza. It was supposed to sell between 5,000 and 10,000 units a year,
Yeah.
and in the end they only sold 204 of them, or they only built 204 of them.
Yeah.
So it was a shame, Vauxhall sort of missed out on that. But then, the 2.3 Magnum, Firenza, they were, throughout the mid-70s to the late 70s, they were very successful cars.
I think the other thing I remember about them being the road-going ones, compared to the fours, they were actually quite luxurious inside. They were rather nice.
Yeah, they did lots of different specs. So you could get a more basic spec, or you could get a more luxurious spec. And Vauxhall looked at having larger cars as well that were more sporting. You mentioned Big Bertha earlier, which was a Vauxhall Ventura.
Yeah, which technically was what you might call their equivalent of a Ford Cortina. It was a four-door family saloon.
Yeah, and Vauxhall, they had planned to launch a V8 Ventura into the English market in 73 and 74, but again, because of the fuel crisis, the car was dropped.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why Big Bertha was only around for a short period of time, because it was decided, we've built this race car to advertise our Ventura V8, but actually we're not doing the Ventura V8, so it's not really needed.
Now, the one thing that your dad was known for was being incredibly flamboyant and a crowd pleaser. Now, I know we chatted once before, and you said, well, he only did that when he was about a good half lap in front of everybody. Yeah. But I mean, he was incredibly stylish, wasn't he? When you watched him out there, I mean, I can remember seeing him as a kid. I mean, when he was, shall we say, putting on the show, he was sideways all over the place, but it was for the sheer joy of it all in many ways, wasn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, when Dad first started out in the early 60s, tyres were different, brakes were different, the tarmac on the tracks was different, and occasionally to get, especially a Mini, to slow down a Mini, you'd get it sideways.
Yeah.
And the same when he then raced, for people that remember the Lotus Elan and the TVR Griffith that he raced for Barnett Motor Company, again, you'd get them sideways. And I always remember Dad saying he went to Spa in 1971, and he got to do a lap round Spa, the old Spa circuit.
Yeah, the proper one.
The proper masculine one.
Yeah.
He did a lap with an ex-racing driver turned journalist called Paul Ferrer.
Oh yeah.
And Paul had won Le Mans, and I think he might have even done a few Formula One races. And he said the thing that he learned was just how smooth Paul was.
Yeah.
And that really made him think about his racing. And from that day onwards, he was then always incredibly smooth. And, whenever Dad was trying, he was really neat and tidy. But if he knew that he was going to win a race, he would put on a show. He'd get the car side. Dad had fantastic car control. Yeah. And he'd get the car sideways. And I'd say to Dad, why would you like that? And it was really for the fans. Dad always felt he was incredibly lucky to be paid to do something he loved doing.
Yeah.
But he also appreciated that without the fans, without people buying the cars, without people, paying to go into the circuits, without the marshals volunteering their time, he wouldn't be able to race. So he always wanted to make sure that he put on a show for the people that were there and were, to a degree, paying his wages kind of thing.
Yeah.
There were times where, he over-exaggerated things. There's always, sort of famous stories of, Dad would have a lap lead, come into the pits, get out the car, kick the tyres, get back in, still go out and win the race. But they were all things that he did because he wanted to entertain people.
Yeah.
Which was quite, which wasn't like Dad as a person. At home he wasn't like that at all. He wasn't flamboyant. But when it came to motor racing, and especially when it came to being on track, he was a different person behind the wheel.
I mean, I dare say doing something like that would have given his team and crew absolute kittens, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a few discussions about it sometimes. But they also saw the benefit of it, because it was something that people would talk about, and it, as I say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So people were talking about, do you see what Gregor Marshall did? All of a sudden it's then talking about the Vauxhall, DTV. So it's all helping the brand, so to speak.
Well, doing things like that, all the cameras, be them the stills or the television cameras, would be on him, wouldn't they? And of course, as soon as they were on your dad, they'd be on the car, they'd be on the Vauxhalls.
Exactly. So, at the time, DTV were, sponsored by Castrol. So it was all good, good publicity for everyone, really.
Now, but it's like you once said to me, when the race started, until he got his lead, he was a very serious and, shall we say, conventional racing driver. He only became flamboyant when he knew he had the lead, etc. He was quite a conventional racing driver to start with.
Yeah, no, definitely. He, as I said, he learned so much from Paul Frere and being neat and tidy, and it was something that he always impacted or tried to sort of impact on me, that it's all about smoothness. You're not having jerky inputs into the steering wheel, not unsettling the car under braking and cornering. It's all about being smooth, and sometimes you can be smooth with a four-wheel drift. And sometimes it is all about momentum. It really depends on the car. Yeah. It depends on the tyres. When Dad started in the 60s, everyone was on sort of cross plies, which, aren't the grippiest of tyres.
Well, they teach you how to drive.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of movement. But then when, British touring cars, or British saloon cars, as it was called in the 70s, they were on slicks, and that would be a completely different way to drive. So it just really depended on the type of car, but he was definitely always smooth. And one of the things he'd always say to me is about being mechanically sympathetic on a car. Yeah. There's so many times people would say to Dad, well, you must be hard on a car. And he'd say, not at all. And he would go out of his way not to be hard on a car. And I think that shows that, as out of the sort of 1,420 races he did, there was less than sort of 60 retirements through damage to cars. Yeah. Or through mechanical damage, which is, when you think about it, it's pretty amazing, really, because cars, we spoke about it earlier, cars in the 60s and 70s were less reliable than they are now. Yeah. Things weren't as strong as they are, even from a racing perspective. He was always mechanically sympathetic, always very smooth, neat and tidy. But when he needed to be, or when he wanted to be rather, he would be sideways and flamboyant. And Dad absolutely, he loved off-road stuff, and so many times we'd go to the local sort of common near where he lived when I was a child, and he'd have a little Suzuki Jeep which I used to drive, and just do things like off-roading, because it would teach you about being smooth and and car control, and that was definitely something he was always very conscious, not necessarily conscious, but he would always impact on other people, especially through any tuition that he would do with people. To be smooth, to be sympathetic, and do all the sensible things.
Now, the one interesting thing is, you mentioned Paul Frere, the journalist. I mean, your dad wrote. He became a motoring journalist at one point, didn't he?
Yeah. So from 1971, Dad had a regular column in Car and Car Conversions, which he had from 71 to 74. Yeah. And it's, I've got all the columns, and some of them are so funny. It's written, it's talking about his motor racing, but also his business through Marshall Wingfield. Yeah. Talking about all the stories from the bar after the racing, and actually the racing probably gets very, very little comment compared to the. Well,
I suppose just butting in, I suppose that the bars, etc. His first biography was only here for the beer.
Yes, exactly. So he wrote for Triple C till 74. Then he wrote for Motor Magazine, and then in the late 70s he wrote for Autosport and had a regular column in Autosport, which again was probably a bit more focused on the motor racing, but again very, very funny at times. Yeah. And then so in 78 his biography Only Here for the Beer came out, and he also released another book called Competition Driving. And the reason he named it Competition Driving was that was actually the name of a book that Paul Frere had written. Yeah. And that shows how much of an impact Paul had on him. He wrote a few books and lots of magazine columns. And it was something he actually really enjoyed. Dad loved reading, and he loved motorsport history. I mean, at home, Dad had a library that was just full of motor racing books and car books and anything automotive. He loved writing, he loved reading, and so that hopefully everyone that reads the columns that he wrote at the time remember them fondly.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, if you look into your dad, besides circuit racing, he didn't do badly as a rally driver either, did he?
No, he did very well in rallying. He absolutely adored rallying. And it was something he wanted to do more of, but he always said that when he got old and slow on the circuits, then he'd go rally. But he never got old and slow. But yeah, so when Vauxhall got more involved in motorsport in '72 through DTV, they had the racing side looked after by Bill Blinstein, and the rally side was looked after by a guy called Chris Coburn. They started rallying the Magnum and Firenza.
Yeah.
So for '73, Dad was there was an event called the Tour of Britain.
Oh yeah.
Which was a mixture of race and rally stages, and Dad was going to do that. And a couple of months, about 6 weeks before the event, there was a rally called the Gearbox Rally, which Vauxhall had built Dad a Firenza especially for.
Yeah.
And Dad actually wrote it off on the first night and broke a couple of ribs and was hospitalised overnight, which didn't go down very well. So Vauxhall actually said to Dad, "Well, no, we don't want you doing the Tour of Britain because you're not a rally driver, you're a racing driver."
Yeah.
So Dad was he was disappointed to miss out on that. So, and that event was the first one was actually won by James Hunt in a Camaro.
All right.
So for '74, Dad again, he wanted to do the Tour of Britain, and said to Vauxhall, "Look, I want to do it. Is there a car for me?" And they said, "No, you're not a rally driver. You're a racing driver." So Dad said, "Well, okay. Well, can I have the weekend off?" And he actually entered an Opel Commodore, sponsored by Marshall Wingfield, for the ex-Formula One world champion Denny Hulme.
Oh yeah.
So Vauxhall agreed, you can have the weekend off. What they didn't know was one of Dad's very good friends was Roger Clark.
Yeah.
And Roger and Tony Mason then invited Dad to be part of a second car team, or to be part of a two-car team in the second car, in the RS2000 Mark 1 Escort for Ford Motor Company. Yeah. So Dad and Roger, they were nose to tail through the whole event. And I think in the end, Roger won by 8 seconds.
Yeah.
Dad was second overall. And Dad actually beat Roger over the famous Epent rally stage, which one of his, he was very proud about. But yeah, Vauxhall weren't very happy about that. But so for '75, they gave him they did actually give him then a Magnum to have a go in. And he also did '76. He did the Manx Rally a couple of times. He did the Welsh Dragon Rally in a Chevette in the late '70s as well. It was something that he really enjoyed doing, and he was very successful with. But motor racing was his passion. Yeah. And what he could never understand, and he sort of went on record saying, "I don't understand these rally drivers. Why would you want to spend a weekend next to a dark, smelly man?" But also, for DTV, they spend all these weeks building a beautiful car, and then it just gets smashed up at a rally. He never saw the point of that. But no, he enjoyed it, and Roger Clark was one of his best friends. And Dad, he did love rallying, and it's a shame he didn't do more actually. Yeah.
Now, you yourself are a racing driver. I mean, as you grew up, how much advice did your dad give you?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a racing driver from a professional perspective, but it's definitely something I try my hardest to do. Advice-wise, I mean, Dad he would give me advice, especially when it came to driving generally. Yeah. From a racing perspective, he didn't really want me to get involved. He'd seen so many of his friends push their children into racing when they weren't really interested. Yeah. And there was still the danger side of it as well. I was born in '77, so growing up in the early '80s, it was a lot safer than it had been, but there was still a danger aspect. And I was always quite a big child. I'm 6'3", 6'4" now. Yeah. So karting and single seaters weren't really my thing. I sort of struggled to fit in them. But I mean, any time I was in a car with Dad, Dad would always tell me what I was doing wrong. Yeah. And I was lucky over the years, especially in the '80s and '90s, that if Dad was testing somewhere, or even at a race circuit after a race, we would always go out on track. Yeah. A number of times I did a sort of victory parade lap with Dad after a race win, and I'm sure some of the circuit owners probably wouldn't like me repeating these stories, but at the end of a racing event when the race circuit was still left open, Dad would take me out on the circuit for a lap or two, and generally going anti-clockwise, which was always an experience, because you're used to racing a circuit clockwise, and when you go around it in the opposite direction, it's a very different circuit. But I think, that especially in latter years when I started driving, and I was pushing to go racing, it was such an expensive sport to get into.
Which regrettably it still is.
And it's even more expensive now. Dad, over the years, Dad made a lot of money from business and motor racing, but he also spent a lot of money on business and motor racing. So he didn't have the money to help, and also he looked at it, that his father didn't help him get into motor racing. So why should he help me? And if I was that interested, I'd do it myself. But I did need his not necessarily his help financially, but his guidance, because he'd been there, he'd done it. Plus, he knew everyone as well, and I didn't want to go down a route where I'd made a mistake. I'd much rather that he supported me, but it just, for whatever reason, it wasn't something that he sort of fully supported. And as I said, he said, you'll never be as good as me.
I mean, what do you race?
So I've got my own racing car, which is a 1974 Vauxhall Firenza droop snoots, which is one of the original 204 droop snoots. And I race that in classic touring cars, classic Group 1.
Has it any connection to your dad at all?
It's got no history with Dad. I have sort of chased its history, and I know where, who supplied it originally, and who, and I've got it subsequent owner history. But I've built it with advice from Dad, from sort of articles and other things that I've seen, talk to people about Magnums, Firenzas about, and also from people like Bill Blydenstein. He was very kind to help me with advice before he sadly passed away. And I race it. I don't race it as much as I'd like to. But again, time and money. And this year, over the last few years, I've been offered drives by other people in their cars, and I've been very lucky to drive some really special cars over the last couple of years. And none more so really this year. I've been racing a 1959 Mark 1 Jaguar Saloon, which is actually a car that Dad raced, this very car, in 1977, the year I was born. I
suppose when you're behind the wheel of that, you sit there and think, don't cock this up.
For me, the gentleman that owns the car now, Simon Lewis, lovely guy, and I'm so, I can't thank him enough for asking me to share the car with him in 2 driver races, and it's been lovely. But also for me, it's lovely to sit in the car and think, my dad raced this. There is also there's the thought of don't make a mistake, don't mess this up. But as soon as the lights go out, you try not to think about that. And if you do think about it, then it's probably the wrong thing to be doing.
Now the other thing is you've just written, or you've been involved with a book on your dad.
So a couple of years ago, I approached Haynes, because Haynes actually published Dad's original biography, and that came out in 1978. Now, obviously Dad didn't pass away till 2005, and did a hell of a lot in that time, probably more so than what he'd done up until publishing his biography. So I wanted to update the story, and Dad's book, Only Here for the Beer, had become quite a sort of cult classic. But I thought, well, it'd be lovely to tell all of Dad's story. And the other thing I wanted to do was, a lot of people said, well, there's no way Jerry Marshall won 625 races. I wanted to show that Dad did win 625 races. So I approached Haynes with a couple of different ideas of a book, whether it be a sort of coffee table size photo book, whether it just be a straight biography, or whether it be like a scrapbook. And Haynes actually wanted to do all three.
All right.
So we amalgamated it into sort of one big book. Obviously, I'd never written a book before, so Haynes weren't. They didn't want to sort of put all their eggs in one basket with me. So they said, well, if we do this, we'd like Jeremy Walton to be involved, and Jeremy is now a very accomplished writer. and his first book he ever wrote was Only Here for the Beer, with Dad, and he said, yeah, I'd love to be involved. So yeah, Jeremy and I wrote the book, and it covers the whole of Dad's life from, growing up during World War II, up until the day he passed away, and it's about his motor racing, it's about family life, it's about business, it's about marriages and divorces.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. I was really pleased with how it came out. It's a big book. It's very nicely presented, and it came out a couple of years ago now. But it's we've sold really well, and I've been really pleased with the reception that it's had.
What's it called?
It's a very imaginatively called Gregor Marshall, his authorised biography.
Right.
We did look at lots of different names, martial art, martial force, Only Here for the Beer too, all these sort of things, and we thought, actually, let's just keep it simple, and I think that was probably the right thing to do, to be honest.
Is it still available? Can people still get it?
Yeah, so Haynes actually changed their sort of company set up a few years ago. They had, obviously Haynes had got Haynes Manuals, and they set up also a publishing side just for sort of biographies and more sort of motor racing books, which they actually closed down a year or two ago, and they just kept Haynes Manuals. So all of their old stock was actually bought by a company called Evro Publishing, and Evro now publish a lot of motor racing books, so it can still be bought from Evro directly, or I still have some copies, so if anyone wanted a copy, feel free to contact me directly, and I can always squiggle a signature in it if they so wish.
Now, one thing I have to ask, I mean, your dad's passed away, regrettably. The world is losing characters, regrettably. How much influence does your dad still have on you?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's probably something that I don't think about very often, because he probably has more influence on me than I think. I mean, from a motor racing perspective, I'd only have been interested in motor racing because it's what Dad did. Yeah. So as a child, every weekend was away racing. And it was such an exciting sport to be involved in, and I loved it, and I still do love it. So that was through Dad's influence. Obviously, some of the cars that I race are through Dad's influence. I mean, my next race in my Vauxhall Firenza is middle of October at Goodwood. Yeah. In the Gregor Marshall Trophy. And,
right.
It's fantastic to be able to, race at Goodwood is a fantastic experience as it is. But to race in a race named after Dad, against a lot of his friends, competitors, people that were fans of his, it's incredible. And I really. I couldn't be more proud of Dad when I'm involved in something like that. Do you
feel the pressure driving in the Gregor Marshall Trophy?
Yes and no. Again, I think I think if you feel pressure, or you're scared about something, or when you're behind the wheel, you've got to be calm, you've got to be relaxed. You can't think about it. You've got to be concentrating on what you're doing. Yeah. So leading up to the race, I'll be tweaked up. But as soon as the flag goes, I'll be fine. And it's there's a lot of planning goes into it. But it's lovely, and Dad still has such an influence in motor racing, whether it be in the UK or whether it be internationally. Last year I had a conversation with Tom Christensen. Yeah. And Tom Christensen, obviously a Danish person, Mr. Le Mans. I would never know that Tom had any link to my father other than he was racing in the Gregor Marshall Trophy. Yeah. And I said to him, I'm Gregor Marshall, Gregor Marshall's son. He said, "Oh, Gregor, your father, he was a hero to me. I saw your father race. He came over to Jarlandsringen in Denmark in 1977 when I was a little boy, and I got to see him race, and he made a real impression on me. And I'm so pleased that I can race in this Gregor Marshall Trophy." And to me, that was incredible, because I wouldn't think Tom Christensen would have a clue who Gregor Marshall was. Yeah. So that's lovely for me, and it just goes to show Dad's. He influences a lot of motorsport. And it does put more pressure on, because he was very successful, he was a character, and you can't be characters like Dad was, and people that were his friends like Tony Lanfranchi, they would sort of run the roost at motor race events in the bar afterwards, and everyone would know who they were, and there'd be lots going on, and you just can't do that in this day and age. It's it's a different time, it's a different era. Does it make the sport poorer for it? To a degree, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Has the sport changed? Yeah, everything's changed. Motor racing is a lot more expensive now, and the characters aren't so prevalent, but they are there if you scratch under the surface.
Yeah, but they don't make an appearance that often, though, do they?
No. We've just, in this social media age, you've got to be so careful with what you say, what you do.
Yeah.
And it's rightly or wrongly. And I'm sure times have changed incredibly. I watch old videos of Dad where after the race he'd be presented with a trophy with a buxom young lady, and at the time it's that was what it was. Whereas times are different now. Yeah.
Gregor Marshall, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much for joining me on the Backseat Driver Radio Show. And it's been nice bringing your dad back to life, if only for 40 minutes. And it will give people who don't remember that era of racing, it'll give them just a brief insight as to what I call proper motor racing and proper racing drivers are all about. Gregor Marshall, thanks very much for joining me on the Backseat Driver Radio Show.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I hope the listeners enjoy what they hear, and hopefully it does bring back some memories and also a little bit of insight into what motorsport used to be like.
Once again, Gregor Marshall, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Rarely beaten on price, never beaten on service. Whether it's cars, bikes or commercials, Hodder Tyres are the best in the business. And when it comes to tyre expertise and advice to supplying the correct tyres for your vehicle's specific requirements, nobody comes close to David Lakin and the Hodder Tyres team. So give them a call on 01200 613 192 or visit the website at hoddertyres.co.uk.